So whatever's said or talked about today, this venue is to prove that we're not going to put up with it. We are going to have more backbone. We're going to have more backbone than the Brighton Centre that took one email from Peter Kyle to cancel it, triggering, almost giving permission to, that we had to move Chris Williamson to the Holiday Inn, who knew exactly what they were going to come under fire for, but they didn't realise, and I didn't realise. So when two men, within hours of announcing it on August the 8th, went into reception and said to, if you host Chris Williamson here, there will be consequences. So then we decided to have the Friends Meeting House booked, but we never announced it. Never announced it. And yet at 10:40 on the day at night, on the day before the event was due to take place, a convicted criminal called Jonathan Hoffman began a Twitter storm, the likes of which you've never seen, that made the Quakers in Britain in London cave in.
Wait.
But they're good people. They're good people at the Friends Meeting House. They didn't know the statement. They know that they were threatened, that they were abused, they were bullied, and that the police and their security company said, I'm afraid because of all this abuse, we cannot guarantee the safety of the venue, its speaker, its staff. So we told Chris this, and at 3:30 I went to Regency Square on a sunny afternoon. At 3:30 I took a photograph with a comrade who's here tonight, Becky. And we decided between us, we'll ring Chris, and we'll say we'll have an open air meeting here. We're worried, but tell him, there's no security, there's no regulation, it's in the open air. At 5 to 5 I rang my long-suffering wife and said we've decided on Regency. We never told anybody. The police got a tip-off at 4 o'clock saying that Regency Square was the new venue and someone was tracking my mobile phone number and they knew that I was there. And that my mobile phone number was on Twitter 24 hours before the meeting. But the meeting went ahead with 150, 200 comrades and 12 counter-demonstrators, of whom 8 had the effrontery to come and stand around, apart from the guy who came up behind Chris Williamson. So that made us determined to have a safe venue. We were going to have a marquee, thank goodness we didn't, in Regency Square. But I must say, as I say at every meeting, we have to thank the private company, the private owners, the 2 directors of the greatest, smartest, grade 2 listed venue in the city for putting up with all the shit that they've had to put up with. We've had full houses like this every single meeting, with only 48 hours notice of any publicity, because we only released the venue 48 hours ago. But this is special, because what we learned 2 hours ago was that Waterstones had cancelled the book launch of a book by academics. And we said we've got a safe refuge, we've got a safe haven. We're not going to give in. The authors didn't want to give in. And the book, Bad News for Labour, Anti-Semitism, the Part in Public Belief. We're not going to put up with this. We want our MPs, we want our councillors, we want our council leaders, but we ourselves, our authors, our representatives, we have to make sure that we're not going to be hidden away in a basement with invite-only meetings. We're going to be stand up, proud in solidarity with all those people who are suffering as individuals, not just high-profile figures like Chris Williamson. There are 12 or 13 people in this city on a map that seeks to identify their homes and workplaces as anti-Semites. I've told the police who's made the map. I know it, Ray Baker, Swansea. Go and get him, yeah? Anyway, here's the book. We've taken delivery at short notice of 29 copies that we're aiming for at Waterstones, but they've somehow ended up here. I've sent a link out on my Twitter, Greg Hadfield, to Pluto Press, not to Waterstones or Amazon or whatever. I'm sure that everyone will do their best to sell it. I've got another venue to go to, but what I want to do is first of all congratulate and thank the 5 authors, contributors who are part of the book. Press turning up, and it will be for me it's a big story, you know. Where do we start? We start banning people, no platform. We start banning books. Are they going to sell the book? Or are they just going to burn them in the street? Because this is how it begins, and it's not going to begin in Brighton and Hove. But as a 63-year-old Barnsley man, I want to say to Ken Loach, Clap if you want. There's a 63-year-old Barnsley lad who grew up as a 12-year-old when Barry Hines and Ken were making Kes, and I played on that football pitch where Brian Glover was the referee as a 12-year-old. Last time Ken was down here, I said, "You changed my life," and he did, because I believed. First of all, it made me a socialist, and he believed that what we're all trying to do is equality and justice for all, and we're not going to be put off. We're going to keep making our films, we're going to keep writing our books, we're going to keep making our speeches, and we're going to find venues that will stand up with some backbone, more backbone than Waterstones or the Holiday Inn. And you'll be as glad as I am that I'm now going to hand over to Justin Schoenberg, who has promised to chair this meeting and take questions, because I've got to go. But thank you very much, and please give him a good go.
Thank you very much, Greg. Thank you so much for having us at this very late hour, this hastily arranged event. I'm just going to introduce each of us very briefly in a minute. I'm sure the rest of the panel don't need an introduction. I'll just say one thing. As academics, we welcome criticism. We get it all the time. It's what peer review is all about. We live and breathe critical, constructive feedback. But when we are prevented from talking about legitimate, peer-reviewed research done at leading universities and institutions, then I think we've reached a point where this repression is going even beyond McCarthyism, and we should all be worried about it. So my name is Justin Schlossberg. I'm Senior Lecturer in Journalism and Media at Birkbeck University. Greg Philo, Professor of Communications at Glasgow University. Mike Berry, Senior Lecturer in Journalism at Cardiff School of Journalism. David Miller, Professor of Communications at University of Bristol. Tony Lerman, former Director of the Jewish Policy Research, and I think without doubt one of the foremost experts in anti-Semitism in the world. I'm just going to hand over to Greg, who's going to give a brief overview of what the book's about, and then we're just going to open it up to discussion.
Can I say, first of all, thanks very, very much to you all for coming. And thanks very much to our gracious host for, as we've been told and as Greg said, this is a place where free speech still exists, and we're enormously pleased and grateful that that is the case. And as Justin said, you know, what is going on? How can academics be stopped from discussing research evidence in a bookshop? You know, it's a joke, isn't it? It's an absolute joke. And you think we spend our lives looking at evidence, looking at data, checking, going through things, analysing. It's our jobs. And then if we look at an issue like this, we commission polls, we do focus groups, we analyse what's happening, we look at the figures, we look at all the published evidence, we draw conclusions, and we say, well, actually, as far as we can see, these figures on the percentage of reported cases seem to be correct, and we can't see why it wouldn't be around 0.1%. Perhaps a little more, but then some of the reported cases are then contested, so it go down a bit. But you're talking about that sort of number. But as soon as we actually say that, after all this work, immediately people are saying, you're massaging the figures, there are thousands more cases. And you say, well, I'm sorry, but we're academics, If there's thousands more cases, by all means, you just demonstrate, show them, we'll consider them, we'll put them in the second edition, you tell us. But this whole thing started with me walking through the street with my partner, and we'd gone to the shops and we were looking at the headlines, that they were full, full of anti-Semitism, riddled with anti-Semitism, all those headlines, anti-Semite army, those things. And I said to my partner, God, what on earth do people think is going on who are reading all this, And we saw my neighbour coming down, our neighbour walking down the street. It was a very charming, pleasant woman who we know well. And we stopped him, and I said, look, help me with a research question. I said, what percentage would you say, this thing about anti-Semitism, yes. What percentage would you say of Labour Party members have been reported for anti-Semitism? And she said, there's an awful lot of these folk, aren't there? 40%, she said. She thought 40%. And I looked at my partner and I said, we have got... Oh, sorry, I think you were making a question. I'm used to students kind of going, just a minute, Professor. I just want to tell you, But anyway, I then said we have to do a poll. So we commissioned a national opinion poll, and from Survation, who did it, and we asked that question: what percentage do you believe Labour Party members have been reported for anti-Semitism? And the national poll showed that on average, people believed 34% of Labour members had been reported for anti-Semitism. That shows the absolutely astonishing thing. Now look, there's no part of the book to say there's no such thing as anti-Semitism. There's no part of the book to say, this is justice for me and there's no anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. I've never said that. What we said is, how do you move from the 0.1% and the reported cases and that level to this public belief? How on earth, how do you get such a massive disparity? And we looked, through the different factors that have produced this, that have kept this story in the headlines, that we looked through in the book a whole range of the issues, the factionalism within the Labour Party, the way in which Jerry Corbyn was attacked with this issue, all of the arguments in relation to that. We look at another range of arguments in relation to issues like public relations, to communication strategies about what the Labour Party did and what it could have done or should do to get its message over clearly. We look at issues like how the right-wing press, and when I said the right-wing press, the press, we used to say, well, except the Guardian, I don't think we bother anymore, do we really? We just say the press, So we look at how the press, I'm sorry. I'll go through all every possible exception. But you see, and I got a wonderful quote in the book from John Underwood, who was an ex-communications director of the Labour Party, and he says, really says, does anybody think for a minute that the media are not going to use this as an excuse to bash up Jeremy Corbyn? Absolutely. Of course they are. No one can be surprised at that. So what have we got to do for a communication strategy? How do we get the alternative messages across? How are we clear about getting clear information out to the public? How do we get people to understand the alternatives, not just on this, but on the whole range of policy and the range of alternative economics, of alternative social policy, all of the issues that are important to discuss. What's the communication strategy for that? We also look in the book at the issue of how there were arguments over anti-Semitism in relation to Israel, how there was this was an argument which goes way beyond the Labour Party internationally to issues like the IHRA definition, the attempts at redefining anti-Semitism in terms of what was perceived as a threat to Israel, a threat to the existence of Israel was seen as undermining the right of Jewish people to self-determination. Though those kinds of arguments, we analyse all of those and show what the whole history of those sorts of developments. We then look at the issue of how how Jeremy Corbyn was seen as an existential threat to Israel within Israel. So you can actually because there's material here about how he's seen within that country, and how you can see headlines, which literally say Jeremy Corbyn is an existential threat to Israel, and he's seen as a massive target because because of the issue of limiting arms, because of the issue of BDS, which he supports. So all of those things are taken. We also look at the issue of, I'm going fast because I want to take questions, that we also look at the issue of institutional anti-Semitism. Tony's written a particularly a wonderful chapter on that, where the conclusion is that the Labour Party is not institutionally anti-Semitic. If anything, it seems to have shown an institutional preference in that area. And then finally we look at the question of all this, how it relates to the fight against racism, how these sorts of divisions, these kinds of attacks, in the end weaken the solidarity that we need as a movement, and weaken the power of the Labour Party as a key institution in the fight against racism, and that how foolish it is to smear and attack in a situation where the great bulk of Labour Party members, it seems, have not had any evidence against them at all, and yet the public have been encouraged to believe that there's an enormous swathe of anti-Semitism, there's an army of anti-Semites, and that kind of the coverage, that kind of traducing of the membership of the party is an appalling thing to do at a time when we need solidarity, when we need the Labour Party to be a powerful instrument in the fight against racism. Okay.
Before we have to finish no later than 9:15, so we've got just under half an hour for discussion. I'm going to do what I secretly always wanted to do, which is play Jeremy Kyle, because we've only got one microphone. So we'll take. What we'll do is we'll take say 3 or 4 at a time, and then we'll ask the panel to respond, and we'll just get through as many of those rounds as we can. So Jackie and the gentleman behind, and then the lady there, and then the gentleman there.
As you could imagine, I might have quite a lot to say about this subject, but I won't. So I'm going to stick to what this subject is about. And I'm sure some of you may know that I contributed to this book, The Responsibility of Intellectuals, which was published this month and is just about to have its launch at UCL. And there have been similar attempts, even though there are not just eminent academics contributing to this, but Noam Chomsky as well, to both ban this book and ban the launch. So what I'm pointing out is that what's happening here is not a one-off. And therefore, as people who are thinking about the responsibility of intellectuals, in some way intellectuals, how can we as intellectuals and as activists respond to this unprecedented attack when people who should be our leaders are remaining silent?
I just wanted to say very quickly that I went into Waterstones and the staff of Waterstones don't approve of this at all. And if you want to complain, and I've already done so, send an email to events@waterstones.com. I know some people from Labour Against the Windschatten have already done that. Also, interestingly, I got stung by a bee on the way out of the theatre, and to recuperate, I went down to the Jubilee Library, and they've got a thing in there called about banned books, including Dr. Zhivago, and So I think we should all go down to Jubilee with a copy of that book and get loads of pictures taken and send it, because I'm sure Waterstones would love the publicity.
Yeah. So we actually heard from a reliable source that this decision came from the CEO of Waterstones, based in New York. So Richard.
Thank you. This is as far as the mic stretches. I've just made it. Richard Cooper, Jewish Voice for Labour. I just want to stress that the banning of the thing in Waterstones, for me, is of a different order from the banning even of Chris Williamson, even of particular individual meetings. This is a chain of books who flourish in the free trade of ideas. That's what they're about. And this is an assault of a different order. And I think not only must we develop a campaign against Waterstones, but as Jackie pointed out, this is one of a number of things that seem to be coming up. And the right to exchange ideas freely in written form by purveyors of books. The next thing, as pointed out before, is they will be burning them. Yeah. We have got to make a general campaign on this. And I ask the authors to help us think through how we can not just defend this book against this particular event, but in general make a stand. Thank you.
Should take one more here, we'll have a response.
I'm a filmmaker, and the subject I've been covering, one of the things that the academics have said is because there's so much business financing of universities, it really has curtailed the sort of research that the universities are willing to allow. And I was wondering if there'd been any problems yourselves on that, and whether you've also had attacks from other academics. So the one I'm covering is around fracking fossil fuel. Academics have actually also been effectively sacked and then had to do many court cases to get reinstated. So that's my first question. Second question, I'd really love, particularly the media studies guy, your reflections on the Panorama documentary.
Don't start on that.
Responses from the panel.
Very difficult questions. How to make the thing go away. I mean, how to transform the terrible situation that we find ourselves in. I just to start at the end, the attacks against other academics in other fields. I mean, I can only speak from the field of anti-Semitism research. And I don't know whether one takes comfort from this, but what we're experiencing, those of us who are studying it and trying to say something in the public domain, and not being listened to, when we point out all the defects of the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism, and again and again and again, and nobody is listening. Nobody in the major newspapers. They simply don't want to hear the message that there's something wrong with that. So, it's hard enough for those of us who are trying to write serious academic stuff about anti-Semitism to get any kind of message of what's in the public domain. But in the academy, there's a war going on between academics in the study of anti-Semitism at universities across the world, in effect. And it's a division, and it's a division fundamentally around, as it were, the old anti-Semitism and those who say that there's a new anti-Semitism. And the camps in this world simply can't talk to each other. So we're at a terrible low point at the moment in the understanding and explanation of anti-Semitism because of this war that's going on, and because of the fact that we can't help people understand what anti-Semitism is today. That polls have been done that show the public really doesn't understand what anti-Semitism is anymore. And in my view, it's very much because of the fact that the whole waters have been muddied by introduction of this idea of new anti-Semitism. And I think all we can try and do is to carry on what we've done in terms of this book, and that's write as much as we can and try and get out there in the public domain with the things. It's an uphill task to say the least, but we just have to keep plugging away.
Very briefly, I wanted to say about attacks on academia in response to that part of the question. I mean, this is, someone mentioned McCarthyism. This is the worst attack on academic freedom since and probably before the 1980s. And the worst attack in the 1980s came from an organisation called the Institute for the Study of Conflict, set up by the CIA with MI6 funding, which produced a study report, one of the authors of which was your friend of mine, Dr. What's she called? Caroline Cox. There we are. I always have to say that this is my favourite bit of her story, is that in 1974, when she was a lecturer in sociology at the Polytechnic of North London, she had a vote of no confidence, a unanimous vote of no confidence in her by her students. So shortly thereafter, she left sociology, joined the Institute for the Study of Conflict, and trying to assassinate the subject of sociology in the UK. And they were partially successful in that they changed the Social Science Research Council in the 80s to the Economic and Social Research Council. So they were partially successful. But since then, as people have rightly noted, corporate power, as a result of the neoliberal revolution, has become much more important in determining research agendas. And I think there's a well-known history of that in relation to climate, in relation to Coca-Cola, you can list all the companies. What's less known, I think, is perhaps the involvement of the state and the secret state in research funding. To give you, I could talk to you all night about this if you want. One example, there's a centre called the Centre for Research in Emerging Security Threats at Lancaster University, which is mainly funded with £5 million from MI5, MI6 and GCHQ. And this is an organisation which has published 31 articles since it started in 2015 in academic journal articles where they're supposed to have conflict of interest statements which disclose the fact that this book's funded. Not a single one of them has made any such disclosure. Right? So no one knows effectively from their publications that this is going on. So this is a more general problem in academia, in the involvement not just of the intelligence services in the universities, but of the recruitment of academics to propaganda campaigns by the state, so that academics involved with the state are engaged in attacking those of us who would otherwise be critical, and I can talk to you much more about that later. But I just wanted to say that of course, this is a problem. I mean, and the anti-Semitism issue is one of those issues, but there are many more problems, especially for those of us who speak out against the foreign policy disasters which this country seems to be intent on pursuing.
Don't want to really add to all that. All I would say is, ultimately, I don't think we're actually going to get the support to raise these kinds of issues that we're talking about today and we talk about in the book from people in the mainstream media. There is no appetite to talk about this, to discuss this, even from people who are supposed to be on the left and are supposed to be supporters of Jeremy Corbyn. There's no willingness to engage or to stick their head above the parapet and talk about this. So we have a problem, I think, with both the mainstream media actually raising these issues and being able to discuss them, but also even from people within the Labour Party. Have we heard anybody within the mainstream Labour Party question all this? And for this reason I feel very sorry for Jeremy Corbyn when he has these accusations against him, because there is nobody to actually stand behind him and back him up, and it must be including him. It must be sometimes including him, but it must be very lonely to stand up there and to take the flak incessantly. So I think ultimately we do have this problem. We have to, I guess, also try and push it from the ground up and challenge these narratives from the ground up, whether that be through social media or various forms of face-to-face communication and organisation.
Okay, I'll just say one thing in relation to the panorama question. I mean, when we did this book, I think it's fair to say, at least I honestly thought it couldn't get any worse. The Panorama documentary was a whole nother level for me. This wasn't anything really, in my mind, that could conceivably be put down to the pressures and the routines of day-to-day frontline journalism. This was an in-depth, investigative, current affairs documentary based primarily on hard evidence, leaked emails, which told the complete opposite story to the one which was reported. It is absolutely clear from those leaked emails that any intervention from the leadership's office was in the direction of trying to speed up complaints, in trying to suspend members where they weren't already suspended by the NCC, and it was reported it almost in a form of doublespeak, as an intervention to protect alleged anti-Semites. And that is something I think is a whole another order of problems. And I know that there are many complaints running through the BBC's complaints framework at the moment, and we do intend to pursue that all the way to Ofcom, and if necessary, judicial review, because I've certainly never seen an example where the BBC has so blatantly breached its own rights. Okay, let's take another quick 4 hands on here.
Can the panel discuss, because you mentioned Jeremy Corbyn, the leadership, well, many of them have said on record that there is an anti-Semitism crisis, we're dealing with it, which gives ammunition to all of their opponents within Labour and outside to smear them. And why is it that when we have outlets like Al Jazeera, Press TV, The Canary, Electronic Intifada, and so forth, which have thoroughly debunked the anti-Semitism smears, why is it that Corbyn's leadership, he has somebody like Seamus Milne, who I know must have seen all of these documentaries and all of these outlets which have debunked it, why do they continue to say there's an anti-Semitism crisis, we're dealing with it, when much of the people who are accused of anti-Semitism are Jewish people who simply are speaking out against Israel for legitimate reasons?
I want to pick up something that David said. I've always assumed that this smear campaign is based upon the excavation of a huge depth of Twitter and Facebook posts. Now, I don't know anybody else, but I can't find a Twitter post I did a month ago, let alone what someone else did 6 years ago. This is not an amateur job to find this stuff. It requires serious, heavyweight artificial intelligence. Now, there are obviously 2 targets of this campaign. One is Jeremy Corbyn and the Corbyn Project. The other one is our ability to talk about Palestine. I've always naively assumed that the heavyweight IT behind this was coming from Tel Aviv, from Mossad, because that's the sort of thing they do. But reading an article in The Guardian last week about the way The Guardian has been subverted and taken away from doing any investigative journalism by direct intervention by MI5 makes me begin to suspect that this mining that's fed to people like David Collier is actually coming from the British security services in an attempt to stop us having a socialist government in this country. And of course this is what MI5's job has been for many, many years.
I don't know where to start, really. Can I... get on with it, Yeah, you're absolutely right. I shouldn't have had that pint of lager. We're trying to break through into a media framework where we are consciously blocked. I mean, Mike's just made a really good point about the role of security services. What you guys have produced is a most astonishingly brilliant and explosive account of the way the media have just lined up behind this blindly accepting narrative about anti-Semitism and the Labour Party and so on. It's astonishing. And which one of you was it that pointed out that we now have to deal with the fact that the leadership has accepted the narrative. This is the problem. I think Justin was mentioning the fact that we've got these various complaints in about the Panorama programme. One of my fellow Jewish Voice for Labour colleagues has today received her stage 2 response to her complaints. And it just goes through and it says, well, I mean, John McDonnell said this, and Jeremy Corbyn said that. And John Landsman, over and over again, has said this, this and this. So why are you complaining when we say that there's anti-Semitism in the Labour Party? Obviously there is. This is really undermining for us. Very, very difficult. So, I mean, we are trying to fight back. The book, we have to promote this book because it is just... And the fact that Waterstones have been intimidated into dropping the launch is I think it should play into our hands. Mind you, I've been saying that for 3.5 years. You know, there's something these people do is going to play into our hands. Never seems to work. Can I just plug 2 things that JVL is involved with? One is the film Witch Hunt, which a lot of you have seen. Please just keep pushing out that URL, witchhuntfilm.org.uk, witchhuntfilm.org, because people can watch the film online, and the more you push that out, because it's not going to be on the BBC, it's not going to be on Channel 4, it's not going to be in any mainstream outlet, but it gives the background story to why we're facing the anti-Semitism allegations that we are. So that's really important. The other thing is, some of you may have noticed in the whole sort of chaos about Labour Party conference, it's perhaps been a little bit neglected. Yesterday, JVL published an exhaustive inquiry into what really goes on in Louise Ellman MP's constituency in Riverside Labour Party. It is incredibly exhaustive. It's taken 18 months to put it together. And if anybody in the mainstream media were to pick it up, it would be quite explosive. So please go onto the JVL website, have a look at that, spread it around, tweet it out, and see if we can get a bit of traction there, because it contradicts the whole other narrative about hard left, Trotskyite, infiltrating, Jew haters, trying to take over the party, when we know that the reverse is the case, honest leftists trying to break through in the Labour Party, which has been dominated by the right apparatunics for years.
Thank you. I'd just like to ask the panel about what their thoughts are about the role of the alt-right in fomenting anti-Semitism. In the area that I come from, in South Thanet, there was a guy called Sam Armstrong, who some people might know of, who was quite a leading figure on Britain's alt-right, and he was involved in framing various Labour Party members in the area simply because they were involved in campaign against the arms trade protests in our area. There's an arms manufacturer who happens to be owned by an Israeli company, and this guy, Sam Armstrong, who is in the Henry Jackson Society, is actually the communications manager for the Henry Jackson Society now. He was actually suspended from the Tory party for various misdeeds and then reinstated. And so I'd like to know if the alt-right is a matter for research in the future. Thank you.
Thanks. Just the gentleman in the back, you're going to have to shout, I'm afraid.
Right, okay, yeah.
No, the gentleman behind you.
Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes.
A couple of months ago, the journalist Matt Kennard published an email exchange he had with Noam Chomsky. It got picked up by certain usual suspects, trolls, etc., online on Twitter, in which they described Noam Chomsky as a right-wing anti-Semite. This is just one example among many of the inversion of the truth. They've taken a left-wing dissident Jewish academic and described as a right-wing anti-Semite. We also have the case, obviously, with Jackie Walker, Matt Wadsworth. There's an endless list of fake accusations, or the sensationalized or weaponization, if you like, of anti-Semitism. So the question is, to what extent does this hollow out genuine evils, if you like, the dark history of anti-Semitism with these sort of sensationalized versions? And then very quickly, to bring it back to the research, your findings suggested that around 34% of people thought that 34% of members of the Labour Party were anti-Semites. Did you find any correlation between that and how they then voted? Or did that determine that they therefore didn't vote Labour? I'm just interested whether there was an impact.
Go on, very quickly. I'll forgive your phone transcription.
The problem I think you've got really is what you're dealing with here is the ruling class. You know, I mean, seriously, the Labour Party, if you take this, is on 2 bases, right? One, you're actually saying that you're against austerity, which is their current strategy for maintaining repression of the working class. And 2, you actually, as in a major imperialist country, you say you don't support Israel, which is a prime imperialist weapon in the Middle East. That's absolutely central to the whole power. So what do you expect is going to happen? What do you expect these people to do? Of course they're going to apply the security services. Of course they're going to apply the media. Of course they're going to apply all forms of power to prevent this from happening. This is where we're at. At the point of capitalist crisis, this is where we're going to.
Okay, thank you very much.
Power to the people!
Thank you again all for coming and for the questions and discussion. What I'd say is there are some important things to say here. The movement is crucial. What should the leadership do? It should defend the movement. If we are divided, if we are traduced in the media and the leaders do not say clearly that the Labour Party is a force against racism, it is not riddled with anti-Semitism. There is no army of anti-Semites. This is not true. They have to stand by exactly what's happened. They can explain exactly what's happened, and they can assert the great history of Labour as a key force in the really terrible times that we face with the rise of the new right, with the rise of new forms of fascism. And the key role of the Labour Party will be to fight that. And at the end of the day, does anybody believe if the Battle of Cable Street was fought again, we say in the book, does anybody believe that the Labour movement, the people in this room, all of us, would be anywhere else but on the barricades with the Jews against the fascists? I mean, where do they think we would be? And it is ridiculous to traduce the whole movement in this way. It weakens the struggle, it makes us weaker and it weakens the solidarity that we will need very, very much in the years ahead.
Okay, I think we're going to wrap it up there. Thank you very much. I think there are some copies of our book outside, and I'm sure we'll be running around for a few more minutes. Thanks.